afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming. For those whom I haven't met, my name is Patrick Wheeler with the Center for Digital Strategies. We're really excited to welcome everyone back to experience the Brit Technology Impact Series for the Center. A little note, this is actually our 10th anniversary this year of the Brit Series. For the second years in the room, I know you've been to a lot of events over the last year or so. For the first years, we run this series throughout the year on a theme across the whole year. So this year, our theme is really understanding the strategic impact of emerging technologies, right? So VR, AR, yes, AI, other emerging technologies. What's the impact from a business perspective? We're going to be exploring that across the year. Have a number of great events already lined up, and some more that are in the works and should be very entertaining and enjoyable for folks. So feel free to sign up on our website on the events page. You'll get an email just like you did for this as well. For the first years also, you all received an email from me around our MBA Associates program designed for first year students. If you're interested and you didn't get a chance to go to the information session, feel free to reach out to us and we can answer questions. All right, so without further ado, I want to welcome JP Gownder here. So JP is with Forrester Research. So Forrester Research, for those that don't know, he'll go into a little bit more detail. It was actually our very first speaker came from Forrester Research 10 years ago this fall. So we've had a really long relationship with Forrester that's been just really wonderful for talking to the students and for the center here. And we're excited to have him come and talk a little bit about disruption and hype and sort of what this whole space is all about and kick the year off well. So please join me in giving a warm, tough welcome to JP.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, Tuck. I'm really excited to be here. I'm going to be talking a bit about, as Patrick mentioned, some emerging tech stuff. Those of you who are technologists will know a bit about this, that technology is powerful. It can change your business model. It can do all sorts of things for your customer. But actually getting technology to work in a business context in a real company can be quite a challenge. Those of you who don't have a technology background, as business leaders of the future, you are increasingly going to be tasked with using technology to drive those business strategies, no matter what vertical you are in. So I'm trying to address both audiences today, those of you who have a lot of tech background and those who don't. And I want to talk about navigating between disruption, which is the potential of technology, and hype, which is what all too often business leaders get sucked into unknowingly along the way. So just to say a word about Forrester, we were founded in 1983. We are a research and consulting firm. I do all sorts of different things as an analyst. I write research reports that are consumed by my clients, so it's very firewalled and proprietary. I do a lot of public speaking. I give speeches in both paid and free contexts. But most importantly, I'm on the front line of working with our enterprise clients, our vendor clients, to try to uncover what are the potentials here? What should you be doing? What is your best strategy? I happen to sit on the CIO team, but I work with a lot of business leaders as well as technologists. So my agenda, I want to talk about the disruption, of course, and I bet a lot of you are excited about the potential for technology, and you really should be. But I also want to be pragmatic and give you a glimpse of what real companies are going through. Real companies can't flip a switch and implement emerging tech on a dime. They have a legacy infrastructure, they have legacy business processes, they have an ecosystem of how they create value, and if the emerging tech isn't woven into that, there's not going to be any value to it. So that's what I'll start out with. I then want to talk about the future of work and the future of jobs, which is intimately related to the adoption of technology. You may hear about robots are taking your job. What will you as leaders face as you lead companies who are tasked with an increasing number of digital workers in addition to humans? I want to talk then the truth behind AI and automation. So I want to thread that needle between disruption and hype, and I'll do the same for augmented, mixed, and virtual reality. And then I want to give you something that I hope will be very useful. A lot of my very senior level clients are finding this storyline very powerful. It's about building a business case internally to actually be able to get others to buy in to your vision of using emerging tech. This is critical. Often, individual leaders have an idea. They think it's going to be transformative. They are unable to sell it within their own organization. And then they say, well, I told you so later when their competitor does it. And then hopefully we'll have time for some questions. So, all of you are probably excited by technology at some level, right? Whether you're a technologist or not. It can be a powerful force in business. And yes, consumer adoption is faster than ever before. What this depicts is sort of the uptake of the iPod when it was released way back in ancient times in 2001. It took about 2 years for the iPod to reach to 1 million sales. The iPad, by contrast, actually, this is an apple-to-apple comparison. It was taken up within a few months at 1 million units, and this was the percentage of people who intended to buy it. We survey millions and millions of consumers over the years. So consumer adoption is happening very quickly, and that changes your job, right? Because you have to be able to reach people on smartphones or maybe tablets or whatever. Yes, disruption by technology kills companies. You may have heard, or maybe not, you guys are quite young to know of TomTom. There was a time when TomTom was a very well-known GPS company. There was an actual GPS company. We still have them, Garmin and whatever, but they sold these units that you would put in your car, and it would sort of take you down the road wherever you wanted. And unfortunately, they ran smack dab into the release of the iPhone, and specifically in 2008 when the iPhone opened up the App Store and allowed people to do GPS using maps and other programs. TomTom's first move, by the way, strategically was to say, we're losing a lot of money to Apple. Let's put out an app on the phone and charge $99 for it. Not 99 cents, $99. This wasn't a very effective move. So what you see is this market cap that was once $9 billion dropped down to about under 1. The company has diversified into some other more fundamental areas of technology, and now they've never recovered, right? So technology, if you miss a big revolution, it can disrupt your business and destroy your company. And of course, everyone's thinking about Amazon these days. I can't swing a dead cat in a room without someone asking me about Amazon, because they are moving into seemingly every area, whether it is your home, as you can see from this, the TV streaming business, music business, obviously e-commerce, voice-enabled agents, even potentially healthcare with some early moves. So getting Amazon is a big issue. This is clearly a function of their technological prowess, the assets that they've built up like AWS, Amazon Web Services, and the ability to create unparalleled scale and reach many, many customers, right? So yes, all of these things are true. And what can happen at a company is if you focus only on cost cutting, you don't invest in innovation that will serve your customers more effectively, if you fail to recognize these technology revolutions as they come along when they're very pertinent to your business, as in the TomTom example, or if you don't have a function at your company that has as its remit the ongoing monitoring, evaluation, and experimentation with new technology, that's when you become digital prey. So some of you may have worked at companies that you thought were a little bit digital prey-ish. Many companies do. I like to say there's a bell curve of clients out there, of companies. And most of my clients are somewhere in the middle. And many of them are at risk of falling off to digital prey. So the disruption is real. And so when you read about this, that is something to know. But many of you probably worked for a couple years at a real company in some real vertical industry, and you probably found that it wasn't as easy as flipping a switch to embark on some big new technological journey. Organizations have all sorts of reasons why this is challenging. I'd like to highlight the difference between two quotes. One of them is from the Google CEO, Sundar Pichai, in which he said, AI is one of the most important things humanity is working on. It is more profound than, I don't know, electricity or fire. That's quite a statement. I don't know that we're there yet. I'd like to contrast that with a real client at one of the biggest grocery companies in the world who told me, I have data silos everywhere. We haven't even completed our move to the cloud. We have a huge infrastructure debt. We can't invest in AI. They do not have the fundamental technological background at their organization, the infrastructure, the systems, the people, to make AI work. So this is the contrast that sometimes you may see. You may see organizations who go out and say, I want to be like Google, but they do not have the scale or talent or background or infrastructure that Google has. So even if you're a business leader who plans to go into grocery, let me tell you, you have to contend with technology. Transportation and logistics happens to be the business of this client. Using AI to actually optimize deliveries is a huge, huge area that is changing that area rapidly. So what they have to do is overcome that technical debt. They have to figure out what moves can we make to be able to invest so that we can catch up to what we think we should be doing. I mentioned some of these issues. Technical debt simply means we've let sort of old technology run our systems for a long time and we have not paid to upgrade them. This is ubiquitous. 95% of companies will have some level of technical debt someplace in their organization, whether that's customer facing or shared services or operations. There is going to be a reckoning at some point, if you will. Lack of alignment. Maybe business leaders are moving too fast compared to what the CIO can deliver. Or maybe they don't have a good enough relationship to actually push things forward together. Lack of alignment is often a problem when you're trying to make these initiatives happen. Making bad bets. An organization that goes out on a limb and does a project in a certain area, well, it didn't work out. Now the organization takes a step back and says, oh, we can't have another failure like that. We lost money on the last one. That's problematic because in the new world, you actually have to encourage failure at times. This is part of the agile development method you may have heard about. You have to be able to fail in some circumstances. But sometimes it sets a bad precedent. Finding a path out of this conundrum between sort of the leading edge companies and those who are kind of real companies means that you have to be balanced in the way that you approach this, and you have to have organizational structures in place to help you overcome these problems. For example, you may want to make some kind of balance between projects that will drive revenue and those that will cut cost. Cutting costs, as I mentioned, is a good thing, but you're not going to grow your company necessarily by cutting costs alone. So investing in revenue generating tech as a balance to cutting costs is often very, very helpful. There's also risk versus repurposing. I may say, gosh, I want to go all in on VR. I think it's big for my company. Well, early indicators are that would be a really bad idea, right? We're not seeing a whole heck of a lot. How many people here are using VR? Ooh, we have 1, 2, 3. Okay, we have a few, but this is at Dartmouth, for goodness sakes. I mean, that's leading edge adopters. Most of us are not doing that. So if we were to bet on the risky new tech instead of repurposing mature tech to solve the business problem, that is a trade-off we have to make. We also need to make sure that we have the right skills and talent and people to execute, or we have to go to outside entities who will help us to make these projects happen. And as I mentioned, freedom to fail. You cannot become good at almost anything as an organization unless you are allowed to learn from mistakes. And all too often, people work in organizations where failure means I'm out the door. So you have to build a structure like an innovation center or an innovation lab where failure is sort of curated and understood as part of the process. Make sense? Okay. I want to talk now a bit about who you're going to be employing in the future, because many of you have read a lot about the future of jobs being robots. So there's a very famous academic study about this. It's by Frey and Osborne, Oxford, 2013. And it was an analysis of all the jobs in America using a particular data set called the ONET database, which is a government source that looks at every job in America and statistically figures out what are the component skills required to do those tasks. They gather this data by going and doing depth interviews with people in every job in America. It's such a powerful resource. It is unparalleled in any other country, which is why two British academics use that data set. And their conclusion of that study was that 47% of jobs are at risk of computerization or cannibalization by computers at some indeterminate time in the future. So you will often hear people say half the jobs are going away, people are going to be out of work, whatever. I have a little bit different perspective. I have built off of the same data set, actually. So I will introduce you to that. But my thesis is that in the next 10 years, let's say, actually 9, my forecast goes to 2027, the more typical case will be that we will be working side by side with robots rather than being replaced by robots. So let me see if I can convince you of that. I'll start with a little history. You may have heard of the wonderful film Hidden Figures. And in that film, Katherine Johnson, Dorothy Vaughan, and Mary Jackson worked at NASA. They were mathematicians, and their job title was computer, because they actually did the computations that sent people into outer space. They played a key role in this. The interesting thing here is that their title was computers, because over the last 100 years, we have essentially asked people to become like computers, right? We've asked people to follow business processes that are very well defined, and business processes are a set of rules. They're very much like an algorithm in computer science, right? An algorithm is essentially a set of rules as well. So we've asked people to follow algorithmic logic when they complete their tasks. This is at every level, by the way. I mean, if you are a housekeeper at an airport, I've interviewed the Cincinnati Northern Kentucky Airport about, they were using wearable tech. They're using smartwatches from Samsung to tell the janitorial staff when to clean the bathroom using AI. It's a very interesting situation, but they are following computational logic. So for 100 years, we've asked people to be more like computers. So it's no surprise if we start passing some of those tasks off to computers, because we have the logic in place. So in the next 10 years, what we're going to see is that almost any business process, down to the level of the janitorial staff, will be run at its core by some kind of software. Automation and intelligence of various sorts, I don't want to call it AI, will become common, but over time. But in many cases, escalations and improving those systems will always accrue to human beings, almost always. In other words, I may be doing a job today, maybe 70% of my job tasks, let's divide the job from the tasks, could go off to, let's take a very simple example. All of us, when we're in professional life, have to set up meetings on our calendar. And we have to email back and forth, and we have to say, oh, are you free this time? Are you free this time? And I mean, this is how I still live sometimes, and it's horrifying. That is a task that is much better done by a computer. There are companies like Zoom.ai, X.ai, and it's funny, a very small anecdote. X.ai is a company who's doing this. You work with Amy Ingram. Amy Ingram. So it comes like you get an email from Amy Ingram, and it'll say, okay, well, what time do you want to set up this meeting? And I had a research assistant who was setting up a meeting with the CEO of this company, and he was doing all this back and forth with Amy Ingram, and he didn't know it was a bot. And it turns out it was actually not a person. It was a software system. So there's tasks like that we're going to take off human plates, right? We're going to move it off, and we're going to say this task is best done by a computer. Okay, so that's the argument for, cannibalization. But really, the future of work is really following two vectors in my view. Of course, we've always had human labor for thousands of years. The IT revolution opened up the opportunity for what is effectively outsourcing to countries other than the United States for labor arbitrage, right? So you have people in the Philippines answering the phone or whatever, doing tasks, people in India doing your programming. That is a existing and now almost defunct revolution, because what we're seeing today and in the future are two things: an augmented digital workforce, where I have tools at my disposal. Some of them could be intelligences, some of them could be devices, some of them could be visualizations, whatever they are, that help me to be more effective in the work that I'm doing, down to the level of people working in warehouses, who I'll show you some examples later. I can augment a worker with technology and raise their productivity. The other side of this is robots, AI, and automation. And that's the part I had just talked about, where you're literally saying, okay, there's certain tasks that can just go off to these bots. These are interconnected. It's very important that you understand that. What is not happening today en masse at the companies I work with is a lot of total replacement behavior. Even Amazon, if you think about their warehouses, they're using lots of robotics, physical robotics. Those physical robots, which were part of a company called Kiva, which was purchased by Amazon in 2012, are working in an intimate dance with the human beings in those spaces. They are actually choreographed to work side by side with people. So these are the two vectors, and let's start off with this augmented digital workforce. I want to give you an example of how this works at its best. There's a startup called Doxel.ai, and what they've done is they've recognized that in the construction industry, 98% of construction projects run, on average, 80% over budget and are delivered 20 months behind schedule. It's a pitiful record, isn't it? I mean, and we know that this is the case. What they are doing to solve this problem is they are employing computer vision technology as deployed by robots and drones who go around a construction site every single day. They photograph and video every single thing that has been done on that construction site. They feed it into a computer vision system that can interpret progress against goals. So on a daily basis, if one set of pipes has not been installed, that's going to cascade, right? It's going to domino other contractors on that project. They want to know in real time, how can I avert this disastrous delay? Now, I'm not going to make any claims that Doxel has solved this, but the concept that they're doing is exactly right. It's using these technologies to help a construction manager stay on time. They also do deliverables to the CFO, so the CFO understands what the financial implications would be if this project falls behind or where they are. So what this is doing is it's augmenting the decision makers using AI. Make sense? Okay. Clinicians are increasingly using technology, not at every hospital, but they are increasingly using technologies. The simplest case, and I know that this is happening in a lot of hospitals, is something like you have a barcode or a QR code on your patient armband, and every time medicine is distributed to you, it must accord with the CRM system. They scan your badge, the software says, yes, this is the right patient, the right medication, here's the amount. There are so many medical errors, as we know. This is powerful. It takes a cognitive load off of the mind of the nurse or other clinician who may be distributing this medicine to you, and it lowers the rate of errors, it increases their productivity. It is a win-win, and as a patient, I'm looking forward to that as well. Augmented reality gets a lot of hype. In the B2B space, there are real scenarios where it is used. One of them is this one. If you are in retail, if you've ever worked retail in any context, you know that like stacking shelves is actually a really time-consuming job. I mean, it takes a lot. So imagine if you could just visually lay it out before you actually stack the shelves. Maybe you could even bring in a focus group and ask customers, like, would this work for you, right? So you're actually saving time. Again, this is augmenting the power of the worker using augmented reality. It's not replacing anybody, it's supercharging that worker's capabilities. Okay, vector 2, robots, AI, and automation. They generate fears, as I mentioned. Most people who are technologists that we survey say that negative attitudes around this are a problem. I cited Frey and Osborne previously. My view is that job losses are real, and you can talk to elevator operators who don't exist anymore, or telephone operators, or many call center jobs. If you don't believe me, they do go away, but they're not the biggest part of the story. One thing Frey and Osborne did is they focused on loss. They didn't look at the new jobs that were created out of the automation economy. And I have a lot of research I've been doing for 4 years on this topic that suggests there are real jobs coming out of this world. But more importantly, most of us, our jobs are just changing in accordance with the augmentation point. My job is different because I work with Salesforce, as a CRM system. It changes the way that I interact with my customers. It changes the kind of tasks that I as an analyst have to do every day. So my forecast says that 17% of today's jobs will be lost to automation by 2027. I use the same data set as Frey and Osborne, but I put parameters around it. They say someday, and I say 10 years, and I used a very specific set of assumptions. So actually I talked to them and they were really nice, but I disagree with the conclusion. But what I'm finding is that there are these new jobs. Whenever you think of it this way, whenever you have a robot, think of a physical robot, you need a robot repairman. And that job did not exist before. There are many new jobs of that sort that we are seeing the green shoots of. So that's the little forecast there. In the future, what we're going to see is that, there's certain jobs that are going away. Office and administrative roles, as I mentioned, you're setting up meetings, you're not going to have a lot of future. Call center, which has already been hit by the outsourcing revolution, is going to be further hurt by really good interactive voice response, not the bad stuff that we see. But we're going to need more people actually with technology savvy in management roles. You're going to have to design the next generation of business processes that take into account AI, for example. Rather than human resources, we may have something like human machine resources, where if you have a digital colleague that you're working with, how do I do that? Where's the learning and development? How do I train my workers to actually learn how to work with digital employees? And so on. In the interest of time, I shall move on, but upskilling is the key here. When you hire people, you're going to be, the burden is a little bit higher. If you're employing some of these technologies, you have to have in place really good training programs. And let me tell you, most companies do not have good learning and development functions. This is an unfortunate fact, but the change management, the learning and development, these are critical success factors. If you do not do these things, the technology will fail. As the job scare shows, AI is kind of the pinnacle of the hype curve right now. You have your, Elon Musk and even Stephen Hawking saying like AI is going to destroy the world. This is a bit vague, kind of prognostication. Back in the real world, what we're finding is there is a backlash brewing, because hospital MD Anderson spent $60 million working over years with IBM Watson to try to cure cancer. That's a very ambitious ask, but they didn't see results, so they pulled the plug on the project and started with a different approach because the software was not working. And you find Bloomberg has this story, what happens if AI doesn't live up to the hype? AI is not, as one of your professors was telling me earlier, it's not a magic wand. I mean, there's a lot of hard work that goes into these things. Technology is a tool. So we're going to see a big backlash. So what is real in AI is solving narrow, focused business problems, well-defined problems with clear parameters and clear results. That's what's working today. That's what's going to work over the next few years. I'll give you a few examples. Salesforce has, in their CRM system, if you're familiar with Salesforce, they have this tool called Einstein. And although Einstein sounds like you could ask it anything and it would know anything, that's not what it does. What it does is it helps to sort of sort through opportunities for salespeople, basically. I'm a salesperson. I have this list of contacts and prospects. How do I predict which one of them is likely to convert and buy my product? Obviously, I want to start at the top of the most probability, right? I want to work on the ones that are most likely to win. And that is effectively what Salesforce Einstein does. It takes different parameters. It uses machine learning in there to help learn from the past, but it's using particular parameters to help score the opportunity for a salesperson to actually be able to go after a deal. That's a well-defined problem, though. This is not the same thing as ask Einstein anything about the future of relativity. But branding comes into play. Zoom.ai uses chat and AI to help employees generate contracts. So let's say you decide that you want to have a new job offer. You're hiring someone. This is often, I can tell you from experience, not the most fun part of one's job because it's very manual. You have to get all the stuff. You're not a lawyer. You're like, it's ugly. What they are doing is they are automating that process using scripts. And what they do is they present you with a standardized form. You put in parameters. It will adapt. And it'll help save you probably 80% of the time, right? A narrow, focused problem that uses intelligence and lots of data, but is tailored to a business problem, not boiling the ocean. Robotic vision technologies uses computer vision and robotics to turbocharge various production. I interviewed these folks, saw their robot, and basically it is using computer vision to assemble complex machines. This used to be done only by hand, by human operators who frankly get inured to what they're seeing go by on this, all these parts. They actually start making mistakes. What they can do with computer vision is recognize a part, pick it up, put it in the right place, and move on. And it can work 24/7. So disruptive, right? I mean, disruptive, but it's a narrow and focused problem. It's practical. Intercontinental Hotels Group is using natural language user chatbot called Amelia, which is, again, maybe a little bit overhyped in terms of its branding, but Amelia does a couple things really well. Amelia can understand natural language in certain languages very effectively. And so complex requests that come into the hotel dashboard, it can actually understand what those things are. It can quickly determine if it can execute against the problem or if it needs to escalate to a human being. And just doing that well is incredibly, incredibly hard. Again, very narrow set of problems here, but yielding a lot of business value. Oh, and I mentioned Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky. They had this situation where their bathrooms were dirty all the time. They kept hiring more people. This was not working. So what they did was they worked with smart watches. They gave them to all the janitorial staff. They instrumented the bathroom with a little sensor, so every time someone goes in the bathroom, it registers as a person. Rather than sending people in every hour, which doesn't take into account the vagaries of flight changes and all that, they went in after 50 people used the bathroom. So guess what? They actually didn't need as many janitors because it was so well optimized. They could actually lower the number of janitorial staff, but actually get much better results and better customer experience. So it's a cool example. So the verdict on AI and automation, is that the hype world or the leading edge that maybe only Google or Amazon can do is a general artificial intelligence that can solve multiple problems. And that is a wonderful vision. It will come true at some point. We are not there. Most business people at most organizations, even leading edge ones, are focusing on narrow, well-specified problems to which they can apply AI to solve a business problem and generate value for customers or operations. That's where we are today. That's where I predict and Forrester predicts we will be for the next 5 years when you guys are out there leading the charge. That doesn't mean that you should give away all of the creativity, and ideas. It just means that be realistic about the maturity of this technology as you apply it to problems. So augmented, virtual, and mixed reality, a spectrum of technologies that are similar. Virtual is occluded, meaning you have no vision. It's a totally virtual world. Augmented means I'm adding digital information to my natural view. If these were smart glasses, that would be the case. Mixed is usually 3D anchored objects. I could see a hologram with HoloLens, for example. These are very powerful tools under certain circumstances. However, again, they are often overhyped. We often think, if you remember Pokemon Go, I'm sure everybody played, you could imagine a world where there's a world of anchored objects. I just pull my phone out, and if I have a certain subscription to something, like there'll be an object that only I see. And because you don't have that subscription, you don't see it. That will get there maybe someday, but that's a bit of a hype perspective. Or, there's this kind of government airport security where they're scanning every face and superimposing over the faces who is who, And actually, some of this is happening in China, but it's not mature. And it's actually, there was a study in Heathrow Airport in London, and they found that it was wrong more than it was right about getting this information. And then there's also things like rendering. Imagine if you're making a movie, and instead of like shooting all the scenes and doing the CGI later, imagine you could render the CGI on the spot. You had the compute to do that. This is actually what's happening at the leading edge of like Marvel movies and things like that. They're using engines that allow them to at least see what the CGI could look like and then refine it later. So all of that is really cool, or digital twins as well. You may have heard of this. This is where you make a digital copy of something in the real world or some process in the real world that is feeding data in real time. And maybe you can look at that and say, okay, this is the operation of my oil platform or whatever. It's a full digital twin that gives me information. All of these things matter, and they are starting to happen. But what is really possible today? What we're seeing is that market inhibitors are there to be overcome. The technology is not very mature. We are not at the iPhone stage of the augmented and virtual reality market, by which I mean before, and I was talking to Patrick about this earlier, before the iPhone, there were 10 years of smartphones that didn't quite take off. They were from Nokia, Symbian, and they were BlackBerry and that sort of thing. We haven't found our iPhone moment where everyone says, I need VR, for example. So we need to overcome some problems for using these technologies. Limits on things like battery life, on use outdoors. Some of the really best devices like Microsoft's HoloLens actually can't be used outdoors because of the light and the way it refracts. Some of these devices don't have safety glass, hard hats. They're not equipped for the jobs that people want to use them for just yet. So we have to keep that in mind. But early successes can show us the direction forward. Ford, for example, is using Microsoft HoloLens and mixed reality in this case to design vehicles, right? So in the old days, believe it or not, and this still happens, you're designing a car, you work with all these different people, you build a clay car out of clay and like walk around it and you chip off of it. Like that's that's how you design a car. I mean, a chassis. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but it's a physical object. With this, you can actually just render something in virtual space, and you can change it at will. And it also means that if I am in Tokyo and somebody else is in Dubai, we can work together simultaneously on the same model in space at the same time. So there's a lot of sci-fi to that, but this is a real scenario, a real thing that you can do today. And what are the outcomes here? It means that you can get better collaboration from more people. It means you're going to have more creativity because you can do more cycles of design. That's a real scenario. I interviewed a company called AGCO. They make tractors. Tractors are actually very high-tech devices today. When you assemble a tractor, there are 2,000 steps plus. And you're a very skilled laborer who is doing this assembly. Unfortunately, in the old world, you would have to go and type a few things on a computer for step 1,612, turn over here, do that, and then you sort of forget, so you go back, and then you go and finalize that, and then you go to step 1,613, right? So with Google Glass, they are able to actually get all of the sort of steps and schematics right in front of them. They can sort of glance up, and they don't have to interrupt their workflow. This is a real pragmatic, focused kind of scenario that creates value. Training is very interesting. I think it's the killer app for virtual reality right now. This is a corporate kind of scenario where UPS, Walmart, other companies have moved a significant amount of their training to VR. Why? Because you're experiential. If it's Black Friday and you've never been through one, you can experience that in Walmart. Here, UPS is using a steering wheel with the VR to simulate different safety parameters, like, I don't know, a dog runs out in front of your mailbox. I don't know. I don't know much about it. But, I mean, it's a cool scenario because what it can do is it's very measurable, it's very experiential, and at the end of the day, what they're finding is that their drivers are better trained. That's a real scenario. Augmented reality is, by the way, still happening largely on tablet devices, not smart glasses. All of us kind of want smart glasses, but they're not ready for prime time. Engineers at Bosch are using augmented reality where you can see it's over an engine, it superimposes and tells you what is going on with the engine. Some of you, I don't know if anyone has used this, Hyundai has done this for their owner's manual for cars. If you own a Hyundai, you can actually download the entire an app, essentially, rather than, like, who actually reads those books, right? No one does. So you actually just hold your tablet up and it tells you, well, this is this and this is this, and it's a wonderful scenario. So these kinds of practical scenarios lead you away from hype and toward real results. So the verdict here is that the hype and the leading edge are head-mounted displays, all of this eye tracking. And trust me, I'm really into this technology. Like, I'm a big fan of it. But it's just not happening yet, and it needs more time before it happens. What is really happening and what is creating value with this emerging tech is narrow, focused scenarios, mostly done on smartphones and tablets. So between hype and reality. Finally, I want to talk about what you guys will do as business leaders as you go into organizations and you say, okay, JP, I'm going to prove you wrong. We're going to do this emerging tech, and we're going to make it work. But how are you going to sell that vision internally? That's the big key issue, because a lot of champions fail because they can't get buy-in, they can't get budget, they can't get people to execute around that strategy. And so what we talk about at Forrester is a business case lifecycle that I developed, which is to say, I'm going to drive buy-in. Too often, has anyone here actually built a business case in the past, like at a real company? Okay, yeah, I figured some of you would, or at least participated in it. Oftentimes, companies think about business cases as before and after. Before, we need a business case to sell this internally. Okay, we'll go and do some numbers. After, we have our business case. That's the end. It's powerful. Unfortunately, this doesn't work often. There's a socialization process that needs to be followed, and there's a lot of storytelling. It's not just numbers. It is a vision of how this technology is going to impact your business. So the business case lifecycle suggests that you have to do iterations. These iterations are not just numerical. They involve a lot of socializing and buy-in. Step one is to establish with an initial ROI model or traditional business case using external numbers, right? So maybe the vendor says, here's some customers that we've served, here's some numbers, maybe Forrester gives some numbers, somebody gives numbers of others who have attempted to use this technology in the past. And you build an initial business case. But guess what? That's not your business case. You need to go through the cycle. You need to elevate that. Use that initial ROI calculus to start having conversations across barriers. If you are a business leader, this means going and doing a deep dive with the technologists and operations people to make sure that this technology fits into the infrastructure. If you are, a more of a leading edge technology type leader, you need to work with other business people to get on board, right? And it depends on what vertical, but no matter what vertical you are in, you need to start having these conversations. As you build those coalitions, hopefully, a vision and a strategy for how this investment will change your business will begin to emerge. The creativity of the group comes into play. This is not just a purchase of some off-the-shelf technology, it is a systemic change. So you have to build that through a lot of hard work. And if you are championing this investment, you're in charge of doing that. Okay, hopefully you have gotten that buy-in. Then you do a pilot. A pilot is a limited but real test of how this technology will operate. You will pay money to do this pilot. You will invest to make this happen. But you will collect data on customer and financial outcomes that will help you down the line to determine if this is the right move for you strategically. Because what you'll do is you'll plug that data into another version of the business case that is much more representative of reality, because it is based on your organization, your vertical, your experience, rather than promises coming from some vague vendor, saying, oh, we can make magic happen. Does that make sense? This is a process. And one of the things when I was like your age that I didn't really understand was this whole issue of buy-in and sort of internal, how organizations actually work. That's why, it's a great idea to get an MBA because I think you get a lot more exposure to that than I did. Sometimes, in order to make this happen, radical storytelling is required. What I am showing you is a real comic book strip that was used by Lowe's when their innovation lab wanted to do the Lowbot, which is a customer service robot that wanders around and you can speak to it. If I've used it, you can say, Lowbot, I want the Black & Decker such and such. Lowbot is connected to the inventory management system. And Lowbot can say, okay, we have the Black & Decker such and such. Would you like me to take you to it? And then Lowbot will start moving and you'll walk. Actually, the number one complaint right now is that it moves too slowly. It's true. Like people don't want to wait for this thing because it's like, I don't want to kill children. But what they did was in order to do this, this is a radical vision. Like not everybody's going to be able to get, an investment in a robot in their store. They hired professional science fiction authors to write stories about the future of retail, particularly hardware. They really did this. They took the best of these stories and they distilled them into a comic book that was used to tell the story of what the end point would look like. And by describing the end point, what they were able to do is to get everyone to say, of course we want to try to do this. Everyone got excited. Rather than when you show a PowerPoint and you sort of go slide by slide, sometimes it says, people in the audience say, oh, that's going to take away from my budget. Oh, that's going to be a problem for my people. Rather than that, get everyone to agree on the end point and then decide how you're going to do it later. So that's what worked for Lowe's. It may not, your mileage may vary. But radical storytelling doesn't mean you've got to do comic books. It means you have to think outside the box, figure out what works culturally at your company for storytelling, and then take it to the next level and find a way to do that. Like I say, you don't really need all these things. You need to have, it's a buy-in technique. So that's sort of the intro. I wanted to make sure we got to some Q&A because I think conversation is really important. I threw an awful lot at you, but I'm curious to hear what questions you have about emerging tech. Yes, please.
So how much do you think regulations and laws in different governments is going to play a part in this, whether it's inhibiting it because of the jobs dynamic and consumer data that's generated, or is it inevitable and everyone just has to get on board?
There will be a tremendous amount of national variance of the performance and the execution of these things. Data privacy is a really good example because it impacts AI in a great way. Anyone who's ever worked in Germany will tell you that they have the strictest privacy rules in the world in Germany. This is just a reality. You have incredible limits on the type of data that you can collect. It goes beyond what, if you've heard of GDPR, the new European privacy law, it goes well beyond that. China, on the other hand, has an awful lot of latitude, right? I mean, they are scoring people based on sort of their performativeness in a social context, and they're using that data. So you're going to see very big fork between a country like Germany and a country like China in terms of how they use that data, because they have different levels of it and what they can do with it. So on a national level, it can matter a lot. I think it can also matter a lot within a country. We have a current administration that is not focused on regulatory action, to put it mildly, right? So I think that, you know, in this environment for this country, we're going to find that there's going to be a lot more experimentation. When regulation comes in, which, you know, just candidly, like, I'm a regulatory type guy, I'm like, let's regulate, but there are dangers to that too. You could squelch the power of new movements that are going on. Patrick and I were having a conversation about driverless vehicles, you know, and I think, you know, on the one hand, the United States is kind of the Wild West right now for this, because it's basically down to the level of the municipality. If Pittsburgh, you know, San Francisco famously said no more Waymo cars, which is Google's self-driving car effort, because someone was hit by a car. Basically, though, you can find a town somewhere in the United States to trial this stuff out, including Boston, where I live. You have new autonomy running around the Seaport District right now. But other areas, you know, you're not having it because they say that it's a safety danger. Bottom line is, this is a very big area to navigate, both on a national level, on a, you know, I think on an administration by administration level, and very much locally as well. Yes, please.
You talked a little bit about labs and innovation labs and the role they're playing in this. Can you talk about, given Forrester's probably talked to a lot of different companies, how are companies incorporating this labs concept well in terms of investigating some of these new technologies, and where's the good steps?
So the first thing to know about innovation labs is most of them fail. They become cost centers, or perceived as cost centers. A very famous failure was Nordstrom. Nordstrom actually made a big PR campaign out of this. They said, we have 50 people, this was a couple years ago, 50 people in innovation, and they're working on augmented reality and data science and customer experience. They had 10 different roles in that lab. And, you know, sort of quietly, about a year and a half later, even though Nordstrom's growth at that point was very high, their financial returns in general were very high, mysteriously they stopped talking about the lab and all those people were redeployed, right? So the best case scenario is to have a small focused team of people, no more than 20 employees, who have a mix of business, operations, and IT experience, who can come together and understand how to apply these things to problems. They also must be allowed to fail, as I referenced. This is a great place to do that. In science, as we probably all know, failure is a very big teacher. In business, too often failure is not a teacher because you lose your job. In an innovation lab, you need to have a setup that is pragmatic enough to drive actual results, while also recognizing that you learn from failures, and you have to have a portfolio. Earlier I talked about how you're going to have different levels of risk for different technologies. Doing a project with a mature existing technology that has just never been applied to your vertical and your business is a great idea, because you know parameters about that tech. But in your portfolio, you should also have riskier, more emerging things that could be leapfrog, that could be disruptive, you know, that against my very pragmatic wisdom today may actually out of the blue change your business. So it is definitely, there are definitely some organizational structures that can be placed, you know, on an innovation lab that will help it. The last thing I'll say is very interesting. There's a whole debate, and your professors could tell you more probably about this than I can, but you know, there's been this debate since Bell Labs, which was 60 years, 70 years ago, about where to locate an innovation center. Do you want it close to your business? Do you want it far away? And I've seen companies that do both things. If you are Viacom, you feel like innovation needs to be seen by executives every day. So you put your lab in the middle of Times Square at the headquarters, so that every time that the executives walk through, you can show them the current project. If you're Nestle, and you're existing in a small town in Switzerland, where everyone lives in the same town, everybody is Swiss or whatever, you know, it's all very insular. They decided to put one of their outposts for innovation in San Francisco. They said, we need to be closer to the disruption that's going on in Silicon Valley. And they send people on these 6-month tours from Switzerland. So this is a big area. I think the thing is there's a wave every few years. It's like innovation labs. Oh, they don't work. Innovation labs. So proceed with care because oftentimes these things don't work. I have done a lot of work in this area. Happy to chat about it at lunch if you come. Yeah, please.
So, currently there's technology that is taking some tasks that, for example, like entry-level lawyers or accountants do.
Yes.
And the way that you become a skilled lawyer accountant is to do those tasks through repetition and experience, and you gain the skill sets to become great at your job. So how do you weigh those two things of wanting to take away time, to allocate time for your low-level employees, but they also need to gain the skills?
It's an excellent question, and right now we're at an early enough stage that this is not often a problem. So if you're in a law firm and you implement e-discovery software, there are enough people around who have done this job manually that they understand how this works, and they can still tutor people and all of that. We do have in different verticals, though, where maybe there's less, like let's say you have people who have a high turnover rate in your company. You're going to have very little of that organizational wisdom. You're going to have to rely very heavily on learning and development to create curricula to train people on how this works. It is not insuperable, by the way. The auto industry has done this for 40 years, right? I mean, using, there are certain tasks that are simply never done manually on a car line, except under duress circumstances. So what you wind up getting are people who understand how to manage the bots. They understand how to manage the technology stack in a way to change the parameters. And by the way, you're going to find that machine learning over time really helps them. It augments their decision making because you learn and you learn and you learn, and the system is always learning. So the outputs get better. I would say your question is powerful because there will be a skills gap. It requires new kinds of training. But on the other hand, as we automate certain things, the very skill set of managing the bots may be all that's needed. You had a question?
Yes, I do. I imagine that you work with clients who are not just leading companies, but also medium-sized companies that actually have technology debt. What strategies have you seen that have worked for them in terms of not just getting buy-in, but actually integrating all the different softwares that different cross-functional teams use?
Yeah, I mean, this is a huge problem, and sometimes you should talk to Patrick about this. He used to do this work in Deloitte. But one thing I would say is it depends on the kind of business you are in, but the technical debt that we're seeing today are things like we haven't moved to the cloud at all, or we talk to companies not all the time, but pretty regularly. They'll say, I have a software system that was running since the 70s. Really? It's true. It happens in healthcare for regulatory reasons. It happens in even in telecom. I talked to a company that was using a really old mechanism. And by the way, in those cases, often the people who program that are long dead. So sometimes you need to actually go to the level of the board of directors to do a digital transformation. You hear a lot about digital transformation. Digital transformation is essentially a set of building blocks. That is to say, we have these very fundamental systems, and sometimes you have to rip them out. You need to be able to build enough of a overarching business case to be able to say we need to invest in this. Forward-looking leaders will recognize that agility, everything else up that stack is predicated on the bottom line infrastructure. But what often happens is quarterly performance, we don't have the money. The reality is your company will go out of business if you do not address these things. You will not be able to compete even on the basic level of email marketing, which by the way is basically a defunct category of marketing now. So I guess what I would say is there are no easy answers. Believe me, I have these conversations with clients and I'm like, I don't know what you're going to do. You're going to have to try again because you don't have the fundamentals in place. But what I have seen is that there are certain leaders who are able to say, look, we have this one problem, but it's interconnected to your problem. You can get other managers on board with this, and then there's change. I talked to this CIO who came in from the outside and didn't know what she was getting into very recently. And she said, wow, I like a turnaround story, but this is like, we need to start from scratch. And so her approach was to build mini business cases with different leaders and sort of form a coalition within that organization to put the pressure on upper management. So, yes?
I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about how AI, the term, is used pretty broadly. So in terms of hype, uncertainty and fear. I mean, you have everything from Amy Ingram, who I've actually interacted with as well, to self-driving cars, to cancer research, to Boston Dynamics, and even like movies AI. People kind of conflate a lot of things.
Yeah.
And there's also more specifically machine learning, and then you can think of augmented intelligence, other things. Like, do you think that matters for people to think about what the actual implications are, and for businesses to pick and choose where they're going to
No, it's a really good question. I mean, for reasons of time, I didn't include our like what is AI slides, but you know, AI is being thrown around as if it were some unitary phenomenon when it's really not. AI is a broad set of technology tools that mimic how human beings are able to sense, think, and act. Everything from I want to sense the world through computer vision, and I need to be able to identify what objects are using broad databases. Lots of machine learning goes into that. Lots of deep learning increasingly goes into that. Machine learning and deep learning are building blocks that are part of AI, but they are not all of AI. There are other tools as well. Natural language understanding and natural language generation. Flip sides of the same coin, related. So essentially what we're dealing with are a number of discrete tools that need to be woven together to make a solution. This is hard to do. It is something that often, if you're at a non-technology firm, you often are going to work with outside vendors to help you to do this, because weaving those things together, or you may go and buy the IP Soft Amelia and sort of live within the limits of what they can do. Right now, what we predict, in fact, I'll give you a sneak peek, because this is, right now is when we start to do our predictions for 2019. One of the ones that I've submitted to our editorial board is that AI washing, you know, you've heard of greenwashing, where you're not really environmental, but you say you are. AI washing will become a huge topic by the end of next year, because so many organizations are purchasing AI solutions that are not yielding the expected or anticipated benefits, because they do not understand what they're trying to do. They're boiling the ocean like MD Anderson. They are the vendors are over-promising and under-delivering. There are just a host of problems. So understanding what AI is in your context, I think, is crucial. Time for one more?
Really quickly.
Really quick question, last question. Otherwise, I will say one more.
Well, I was innovation manager in a big company, and my main problem was to sell the product. It was much easier after I got my first success. But do you have any advice when you are new in a company?
Well, yeah, I mean, the first success thing is very powerful. Actually, my research shows that as well. If you can engineer an initial success, which I realize is kind of chicken and egg, right? If you can't, then you're in trouble. But being able to then be very good as an evangelist, as a PR person, as an internal marketer, these are important skills. And if a lot of times technologists do not have those skills. Business people sometimes have the skills but don't have the technology chops. So as MBA students, I guess my last recommendation is whatever vertical industry or area of business you're going to be in, technology will touch it. Be digitally literate, and very good luck to all of you. Thank you. Thank you.